Hello and welcome to another Star Wars Roundtable review, this time being for the almost unanimously considered to be the best movie in the Star Wars franchise, The Empire Strikes Back.
There's so much to remember here. Just like watching it again, it all just kind of floods back. It's like, I remember this. Like, it's funny how much of it is in our pop culture now.
So what's funny about this movie is the I'm Your Father thing was like the biggest twist in like up to that point had been like the biggest twist in cinematic history, because everybody thought Darth Vader was the bad guy, and then he's like, no, Luke, I am your father. And he's just like, what the no, and turned everything we knew about Star Wars on its head.
Now, do you guys actually have like any stories from when you were kids reacting to that, like at all, or because I don't? I think it's just something I've always kind of intrinsically.
Yeah, I've always watched them in the trio since I was born. So,
Yeah.
But my parents were around for back when Star Wars was first a thing, and my dad, he said that the entire theater was just shocked and awed by it. One of my little weird possessions that I picked up over the years is a pair of magazines, science fiction magazines from the 70s.
Okay.
Oh.
And so they talk about D&D like it's a brand new thing, and they're talking about some of the books that are coming out. But the front page article for one of them is theories and speculation about Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, really?
And
the Reddit before the Reddit.
Exactly. And so
Wow.
there was theories about Boba Fett being a secret clone of Anakin Skywalker and things like that. Because all they had to go on were just shots and a few trailer images.
Wow.
And so they went crazy with the clone speculation, with the just who is related to who's gonna beat who's gonna kill who, all kinds of things. And it was really interesting. Very few people mention the idea that Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Well, and then it ends up being Leia's father too, because they reference that. That part I actually paid attention to this watch through. When Luke's taking off to go to Bespin, Obi-Wan goes,
That boy is our last hope.
No, there is another.
I can't imagine what people would have done with that now. If The Empire Strikes Back had come out like now, they'd be like, no, there is another. Like everybody would have been like, who's the other? What's going on? What?
35 things you missed in that one scene from The Empire Strikes Back. Red circle, red arrow. Watch this video and subscribe.
Oh, those are the worst. They definitely didn't know it was Leigh at the time, and George definitely didn't.
Yeah, no, they didn't.
I still enjoy the kissing scene right at the beginning. That scene is so funny.
Is the best.
Because it's Leia being so aggressive against Han. Like, there's no affection in between Luke and Leia. Like, she's literally just doing this to get back at Han.
Right.
And she just plants it on Luke, and Luke's just like,
I'm awesome.
And then in the next movie, Luke's like,
Oh, this is awkward.
The best part about that though is when Luke wakes up and he's like, you could pull the ears off a Gundark. And he's like, thanks to you. That's 2 you owe me, Junior. And then then Leia and Han talk about how he had to stay longer, and he's like, I think you just couldn't let me go because of your feelings. And Luke does this eye roll, Mark Hamill does this eye roll in the background. This is the funniest scene. He's like,
They're so good together. That is one of the best things that I noticed about this movie. Their chemistry is flawless.
all 3 of them. It's really entertaining.
And then once Lando comes in, his chemistry fits right into the group. It takes a little bit, but once he actually turns out to be a good guy, he's a flawless little fit-in for the rest of the group.
yeah. You know, it's actually, I like that you mentioned that because it reminded me of another moment, kind of close to that same scene, and still in the first act in the Hoth base. There are so many moments in this movie that are clearly like well done and a clear sense of what Irvin Kershner did for his direction.
Yeah.
Because I remember one part that I laughed so hard at is in the scene where Han Solo's like, deck officer! What Han does is he puts his hand on C-3PO's
I know.
mouth.
I watched that. I was like, that is hilarious.
Well, did you see what C-3PO does? Like, he's standing there and he's like,
C-3PO does that so many times in this movie. Like when they actually get to during the Battle of Hoth and they're actually getting inside of the Millennium Falcon to leave, the door closed and he's just like, oh, typical. He's like looking away. It's like, this is the dumbest thing. This happens all the time.
So the funniest part is, speaking of that deck officer part, he's like, he didn't check in. Why don't you go find? It's possible. Why don't you go find out? And then Han turns around and he's thinking, and C-3PO's talking to him, and he goes, I don't remember what C-3PO says, but Han's like, yeah, you should go check that out. And he keeps walking, and C-3PO just looks down and he goes, looks at R2 and he goes, impossible, man. And he walks the other way from him.
So much personality. It's great.
It feels like, in the canon, it's 3.5 years in between New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. Mm-hmm. And it feels like it's been that long. That they've been fighting alongside each other. And they've been working with each other, and getting to know each other, and then dealing with each other's problems. It feels like they're all working together. Mm-hmm. And that's such an interesting and well-written aspect to this movie.
It's great that they didn't make it feel forced. Like, it actually does feel fresh and lived in. Which, that could be a byproduct of just the fact that, the world that they're in and kind of like the situation that the rebels have found themselves in kind of adds to that.
Yeah.
But it isn't just the plot basically trying to convince us like, oh, these characters they're close with each other. It's like the actors this time, knowing the success that the original movie had, you can see like the way that they play into their roles.
They gave a crap this time.
And they gave a crap this time.
and it shows. Harrison Ford is the most smarmy and like lovable, jerkish kind of guy you could ever imagine. Every single time he opens his mouth.
Mm-hmm. Something I thought of too, in New Hope, they were kind of like winging it, like, oh, I hope this works. In Empire Strikes Back, one, they had a better budget.
Yes.
For sure. All the way. Because the way that the sets are designed, models are made, and everything is like top notch. Like, I feel like this movie still holds up today, even though it's like, I don't know what year Empire Strikes came back.
It's almost 40 years old. It came out in 1980.
But it still holds up today, which I thought was really interesting about this movie. And like the stop motion parts with the tauntauns. Haley and I had never sat down and watched it together, so she watched it with me. And I was like, see, that's a model. And she's like, what? That's not a model. Mm-hmm. Like I was pointing out stuff like, that's a model. And she was like, wow,
that's a painting.
That's a painting. That's this and that and the other. And I as soon as I was pointing that out and pointing more stuff out, I was like, man, they did all that in 1980 with paintings and little models that look just amazing now. And it looks better than some of the CGI that's out now.
Like you mentioned the settings and the areas that they were in. There's only a few areas that they're in. Like they go to the same rooms for the majority of the movie. Like Dagobah has 3 different sets.
Which, that was one that I was like, that's a set. And she was like, no way, that's on the rainforest. I was like, no. They had to build this with like 3 foot up from the ground so that they could have Frank Oz underneath puppeting freaking Yoda. Yeah. And I was like, they had to build that. They had to build like a whole bunch of stuff for this movie. And they did it to where it looks like they literally pulled out a section of freaking the rainforest and built Dagobah on it. The other thing that's really interesting is when they're filming Hoth with Luke, they filmed that in a blizzard in Norway.
Really?
So all that stuff is Mark Hamill actually walking around in sub-zero temperatures where you can barely see, and he's just like, ugh.
That's just one of the things that I'm trying to say is that there's so few sets that they actually go to. Like, they use the same hallways over and over again in Cloud City and in Hoth Base and all these different places. But they're so good.
Yes.
Like, every set that they go to feels like a lived-in part of the world. Like, some of the action movies that you'll see today, they'll be going down 50,000 streets in one chase sequence alone, and yet you don't even care because the set's gone before you even get a good look at it.
Right.
But you're seeing every detail of Dagobah or of Cloud City, and it looks like a real world.
Speaking of Dagobah, Luke throws out a gigantic number of snakes from around him. Pulls a snake out of the X-Wing, pulls a snake out of Yoda's house, walks past the snake, like he pushes a snake out of the way in the cave. Like there's a bunch of snakes that Mark Hamill was just like,
they were
thrown out of the way.
They were leftovers from Indiana Jones.
I was like, seriously? I was like, for real? Like, why does he keep picking up snakes?
And I also like how he's eating a taquito, like a microwave
Yeah.
taquito.
That's pretty much what it looks like.
That's my dinner.
How you get so big eating food of this kind?
Yoda is so well written.
Yes.
Goodness gracious. Like, he establishes that he's the goofy, weird alien, but as soon as Luke starts to introduce who he actually is and what he's doing, Yoda's already dropping wisdom. Well, wars don't make one great.
Yeah, I was watching that
already
too.
teaching Luke from the very first chance that he gets.
Yeah, I was blown away by Yoda this time around. I was like, whoa, there's a lot of like, he's like talking. What's funny is he's dropping hints that he's Yoda like the whole time that he's talking, and I never caught that before. I was like, oh, Jesus,
Yoda's very close, very close.
Come on, Luke, come on, man. And then when Luke realizes that it's him, he's like, Yoda, never in front of your nose. It's in front of your nose.
Never paying attention to where he is.
And Luke moves back. Adventure, excitement. Like
All this time was he looked away.
he's just they really got it done with the screenplay, and I think it's good that George Lucas was there to do part of the screenplay and wasn't direct, because I think that wasn't directed because I think that shot the movie up a little bit. Because the guy who directed Irvin Kershner, sorry. The way that he directed the whole movie, the pacing, all that stuff was just tip top. I really liked it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely on point. And it's interesting because I've thought a lot about pacing in all the reviews that I've ever done, because like it's such a weird phenomenon to think about. What keeps people's attention in movies? You know, like what constitutes as boring or pulls people out of movies? I think it's not necessarily always having action going on, because really Empire Strikes Back doesn't really have all that much action in it.
It really does.
No.
And yet it's one of the best paced movies in this series, because there's always something of importance going on. Whether or not that might be Yoda teaching very important things to Luke, things that we can take for ourselves, or you know, Han and crew trying to find their way back to the Rebel fleet. All this stuff, it's like it all contributes well to the story. It builds the world. And it's investing because it always begs for our attention.
Yes.
It's not stuff that's just thrown in there to prolong the runtime, you know?
I definitely think a big part of the pacing is how they started it off. From the very first lines of every single character and the introductory shots and just how they are thrown into this world, you're seeing their pure personality go through.
Mm-hmm.
Han starts off like talking with Luke and joking around, and then he goes straight in and argues with Leia and telling the general about what he's going to do.
He's going to pay
Leia
a
starts
price.
off looking at Han all like, but then she immediately gets into a conversation with him that's very intense and shows off what she is going to be developing. It shows their whole arc as a character in the first few shots of every single character. With the pacing in mind, because that's a high start, you can only go up from there. They don't need to back off and be like, all right, who's this character again? What's he doing here? No, they can just keep moving up and up and up.
What's funny is all the characters have interactions with each other. Like when Luke interacts with Chewie and he's like, Chewie, take care of yourself. Remember in New Hope when Luke tries to put the binders on Chewie and Chewie's like, "Argh!" and Luke's like, ah. Now you can see that they're buddies because Luke like scratches his neck or something, which I always thought was kind of weird because that makes Chewie look like more of a pet than a person.
Yeah,
But
he's the family dog.
that's just a minor thing.
Hence Spaceballs.
Yeah. But they're like friends, and Chewie hugs him, and he's like, all right, don't hurt me. Anytime Darth Vader is in this movie is phenomenal.
Yes.
Because he's as clumsy as he is stupid.
You are in command now, Admiral Piet.
Chokes him out.
As his CO was just
Getting choked out behind him.
Like, it must suck to be an officer on Vader's
Seriously.
ship.
Yeah.
He kills 3 officers, all the 3 high-ranking admirals over the course of the movie.
That's true.
That's
Kills
crazy.
one, replaces him with someone else. Kills him, replaces him with someone else. And some of the other officers get blown up by asteroids.
Right.
He willingly lets like this one great Star Destroyer get ripped apart by asteroids, and then on the hologram, like I said, just the one guy's like,
Okay, so there was one thing that I noticed. The Captain Nita, when he chokes him out and kills him, that scene, Captain Nita and Vader are standing right here in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you notice in the doorway, there's Admiral Piet and the guys looking at the computers here, and then there's like 7 officers standing on the outside of the door looking in. And Vader goes, apology accepted, and he walks past them, and then he's like, and the floor guys go over and they carry the body away. And as soon as he turns around, all 7 officers scatter. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. I had to rewind. I was like, did I just see this? They all scatter away so they don't get.
They have so many good background details just like that. Like when Vader's just walking through the ship, you'll see officers like look up like immediately just start pounding at their keyboard because they just don't want to catch his attention.
Right.
That reminds me of the scene when Darth Vader's interviewing all of the bounty hunters. Mm-hmm. Right after the one officer's like, bounty hunters, we don't need this scum. Like literally 30 seconds later, after Vader talks to the bounty hunters, the one officer's like, my lord, we found them. It's like, okay, I guess you don't need their scum.
And at the end, they didn't need him after all. So.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Boba Fett is, I don't know, he's a really entertaining character. He says like 0 lines.
But that's
in the whole trilogy, pretty much.
That's part of the appeal, which is something that my dad talked about that even he remembered from the original showing of Empire Strikes Back. And they've changed some of his lines now so that he has more lines in this movie with the new voice. But one of the really exciting things about Boba Fett was that he was the one person besides Grand Moff Tarkin who talked back to Vader. When Vader said what he was wanting the bounty hunters to do, Boba Fett gets in his face and says, I'm the one that wants this. I'm the guy that needs Solo alive. You can't kill him. Oh
yeah, he's like, what does he say? He's no good to me dead. He will not be permanently damaged.
And Vader has to also clarify his instructions just to Boba Fett. No disintegration.
Right.
Like, Boba Fett is such a cool character, even without 5 lines, because of how the current cool character acts to him.
That is true. I've never thought about that. So there's one part of that whole Vader Emperor dynamic. This is the movie that we first get introduced to Vader's boss. Mm-hmm. And if you remember from before the special editions, it was somebody shrouded.
Yes.
You didn't know who it was. And they went back through in the special editions and made it
worse
to Ian McDiarmid, which
they change his dialogue. They make him fully visible.
I would have liked them if I'm gonna have one gripe. I probably would have liked to have the Emperor be still this shroudy figure. Even though we've all watched the movies and we know who it is. I still would have liked for him to still be kind of mysterious. Because at this point, we still didn't even know who he was.
Instead of Ian McDiarmid just kind of sitting there relaxed with a hood over his head.
I was gonna say, he looks like he's lounging in a lazy boy, honestly. And
he's
then
in the
there's
jacuzzi on Coruscant. It's like, hey, I'm gonna call Vader really quick, guys. Vader.
I mean, it isn't so bad because, that change was made knowing that we would be watching that, having seen the prequels. But, yeah.
There's a whole new generation rising up.
True, yeah.
They'll never know the shadowy figure.
And there'll also be a new generation that never will have seen any of these in theaters. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how parents raise their kids, whether or not it's like a original prequel sequel trilogy family or just like 1 through 9 kind of family.
Oh, there is one thing I wanted to bring up in this video. If we're looking side by side with the second movies in each of the 3 trilogies, with the prequels, the originals, and the sequel movies, Empire Strikes Back is the gold standard, right? Because it's the best one.
We're comparing it with Attack of the Clones.
So here's my thing. So listen, stay with me for a second. Attack of the Clones tried to be darker. Remember they had Anakin kill all the Tusken Raiders and do all that stuff, and it ended up being a spectacular blunder for a lot of reasons that we won't
watch
go
that
into
video.
That.
But you can kind of see another. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you can see where they tried to go darker with Attack of the Clones. Mm-hmm. We don't need to talk about that. We already destroyed that movie already.
I was just about to say, you can see another parallel too. Like in this movie, they split into their 2 different groups to go on 2 different storylines that will lead to character development for both parties.
Right.
That's the same thing that happens in episode 2 and the same thing that happens in episode 8.
Yes, that's what I was going to bring up. Is that they're trying to do Last Jedi, like Empire Strikes Back. Here's where I think that it is not like Empire Strikes Back. And it goes back to them picking up right behind Force Awakens with Last Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we were talking about this working one time. With Force Awakens, they kind of wrote themselves into a corner with Force Awakens. And then they're like, Last Jedi is going to be right behind it. So they have to take what they found at the end of Force Awakens and make it Last Jedi-y, if that makes sense. And so they kind of, if they'd have taken the 3-year difference, like they did with Empire Strikes Back, you would have had time to develop characters to where they could have been, like the character development, which I think was a
Actual
little
comrades.
right,
Yeah.
where it would have been, it would have helped the Last Jedi story if they'd taken 3 years to develop and have them grow up a little bit, Rey and all of them being resistance fighters and whatever. We'll get into it with Last Jedi, but I thought it was an interesting parallel where you see what happens with 3 years, and Empire Strikes Back is awesome. You see when they go side to side, and Last Jedi is good, but it could have been like Empire Strikes Back, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the important things that changes with between all 3 of the sequel movies is that both these convergent stories, divergent stories, when they do get back together, everyone is benefited by the other people's story as well. Because Han and Leia were able to get together, and because they were able to stay together and do everything with Lando and get caught, Luke was able to learn something about the Force that he didn't know beforehand and go and save them, and his story was advanced because of that. Because of what Luke learned and how he was able to develop as a person and as a Jedi,
Yeah.
Darth Vader was able to not stop him, and the whole shenanigans with Lando Calrissian was able to happen. If Luke had been caught, Lando and his group would never have stood a chance. Vader would have had what he needed, and
Then he would have just destroyed everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
That is true. I've never thought about that, actually.
Definitely something you couldn't say about Attack of the Clones, though. I mean, like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
because all of those are basically just like, oh, they're gonna
They just happened to go to Geonosis.
and Coliseum battle with
Oh.
monsters.
And, like, it seems like even the actors are surprised. Like, Obi-Wan's like, what are you guys doing?
We were
Good
going
job.
to rescue you. Good job. It's like, anyway, you can see that they're all trying to follow kind of the same formula of divergent stories. Everybody links back up at the end. It's just interesting the way that they executed with Attack of the Clones and with Last Jedi and with Empire Strikes Back. Because the first time they did near perfect movie with Empire Strikes Back, and with Attack of the Clones.
A near imperfect movie.
It's a template that's kind of rippled into blockbuster filmmaking in general.
Yeah.
Whether or not it might have been, you know, a series trying to be a trilogy or whatnot, you know, even in Infinity War, like last year, you know, those were all 3 different convergent storylines that were going on that kind of contributed towards the end. Well, I mean, not so much, because it was kind of like 3 convergent stories that were all impacted by one thing.
Yeah.
But a similar concept, you know, you had like, you know, Tony Stark and Doctor Strange and all of those, and the Guardians of the Galaxy
And Spider-Man.
and Spider-Man,
Sorry.
of course. They're all in their little section.
Rip Spider-Man. Sorry.
And then you had, of course, you had Thor and Rocket and Groot all on their adventure to get Stormbreaker,
Right.
and of course Captain America and all of them going to Wakanda. And ultimately, it led into a final film and the next story that brought them together and used their individual storylines to all contribute. And other films try to do this, and others a lot fail. And ultimately, Empire Strikes Back is just the gold standard of like a middle film.
Mm-hmm.
One that takes its characters into new and interesting places while still maintaining what was successful from the previous entry.
Yes.
You know, the filmmaking, the characters, the action sequences,
The
and
practical effects.
practical effects for sure. So good in this movie. I mean, the lightsaber fight between Darth Vader and Luke,
One of the
chills.
best. Yes.
Yes.
Just the mood of it all. Like when it starts and just the low, deep music. Actually, lack thereof for a little bit.
And Darth Vader just playing with Luke.
Can
the
I
entire
say-
time.
Yeah.
Darth Vader's a master of trash talk. He's like,
The Force is with you, young Skywalker. But you are not a Jedi yet.
Because Luke's like, oh yeah, I feel the Force, I can be a Jedi. And the first words out of Vader's mouth, you're not a Jedi yet. It's like, oh.
Or when he thought he caught Luke, he's like, all too easy.
Right. And then he's like, indeed you are powerful. And then he starts playing games with him, throwing stuff at him. It's just, the whole sequence with him and Luke is just...
Well, and it's great too, because I was thinking while the fight was going on, it's like, this fight could be a lot more intense, but I like that it wasn't, because Vader clearly wasn't at his full potential.
Right.
He was going easy at Luke to basically let his guard down and to test him.
Well, first just to trap him, but...
Yeah, to trap him too. But then, once he does unleash more of his rage, when like he kind of whacks him in his shoulder a little bit.
Destroys Luke immediately.
No, his sound when he gets cut, he's like, wah.
Just going back to that trilogy idea, there's memes and stuff about it. That's how it's kind of the golden just example of what big like cinema trilogies will be. You've got the first one with a good idea, introduces you to the world, ends with a bang, it's great. Second one, a lot of people will consider to be better. It's more character focused, doesn't quite end with just the biggest bang, but it does end with twist, and it sets up for the third one. Third one tends to go back to what made the first one good, but also ups the scale. Like you see that with the Dark Knight trilogy. You see that with the Indiana Jones trilogy.
Yep.
You see that with all different kinds of trilogies that are basically going on that concept that first one's good, second one's changes it up, third one's what the first one did, but better. Or bigger, at least.
Right.
Sure.
And so you definitely see that here. And it's set the stage for cinema, like as we know it currently.
And thankfully, when we do talk about Return of the Jedi next month for that video, it's great how they took that formula you just talked about, and they provided one of the best endings they could have done for the original trilogy.
I agree.
Yes.
It's hard for me to really say what is my favorite Star Wars movie, because A New Hope is so great and just is a satisfying movie on all fronts, but Empire Strikes Back is undeniably better made and holds up better. I mean, A New Hope does, of course, but I mean, when you're looking just at the level of craft that's on display and the talent and the desire to make something good, Empire Strikes Back holds up much better just because you can see that. You can see the improvement that went from 1977 to 1980 once they knew what they had accomplished and what they were going to do from then on.
It's true.
So, like A New Hope, I'm going to give this one an A+, but in terms of objectivity, I think Empire Strikes Back is slightly better.
I think it's a 10. I thoroughly enjoyed watching this movie again. I forgot how cool this movie was. Like, I sat down and watched it, and I was like, wow, this movie is by far and away probably my favorite. Edging slightly over New Hope just because this movie's just... It has some of my favorite Star Wars moments. And the whole part with the asteroid field is like vintage, but vintage Han Solo. Where he's yelling at C-3PO while he's trying to do all the ship stuff. Close!
Close!
Just the best. And then Chewie's like, "Arr!"
Shut him up or shut him down!
Everyone is yelling at each other, and that's one of the best parts about this. No one is like just talking. You've got Han yelling at C-3PO, C-3PO yelling at everyone, Chewie's just yelling, Leia is yelling at Han, like it's...
Chewie's just, "Arr!"
Well, the best humor comes from pain.
Yeah.
So,
It's not fair.
might as well have people yelling at each other.
Oh, it's true. It's true.
Anyway, it's just I thoroughly enjoyed watching this movie. I enjoyed watching New Hope, and New Hope is up there as it's a solid second, but I gotta say Empire Strikes Back is better than all of the rest of them.
For me personally, I will acknowledge that Empire Strikes Back is near flawless in execution on the technical level, and I will say that the writing is excellent, the pacing is excellent, the story is excellent, and generally everything is near perfect for this movie. New Hope for me was something special because it inspired me to become the person that I am today. It inspired my interest in everything that I like about Star Wars. And so while that technically like leaves it a little bit better than Empire Strikes Back, I would probably say that Empire Strikes Back is a better movie.
That's how I feel.
Like, I like New Hope better, but Empire Strikes Back is a better movie. So I'll just give it a 9.8 and call it near flawless for me.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. That's an extremely high recommendation from all of us. If you haven't seen this, what are you
really
doing?
Need to go watch it.
What are you doing?
Why are you even watching this channel?
Right.
We've been telling you since the end of Revenge of the Sith, or end of Solo, right? We've been talking about how these two were like the best ones, and Return of the Jedi is good too. Like, do yourself a favor, just go watch it. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, Disney Plus is coming out soon too, so if you want to just wait until then, you can stream them, you don't have to rent them, and then it'll be great. Tune in next month when we, like I said, we'll be reviewing Return of the Jedi. That should be a lot of fun. I think we're going to have another guest or two for that one, so we may have to change it up for the set, because we can't really feasibly fit 4 or 5 people back here. That's just nuts.
It's gonna be a lot of people.
But we will.
The Ewok Adventure movie.
Oh, stop.
Redacted. We're not doing that.
That's not even a movie.
Oh, we need to do
It's a
that
Saturday
and the
morning special.
holiday special.
Oh my god.
If we're going to do something terrible Star Wars related, we got to do holiday stuff.
Of course. We should do that in December right before it comes out.
Yes,
Yeah.
to celebrate Life Day.
Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to both Jared and Justin for joining me in this review once again.
Yep.
If you like this content, please like and subscribe for more content, and it also helps me grow my content here as well. You can also check out my social media pages that are linked in the description below to find other things you won't find here on YouTube. But in the end, thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a great one.
Ciao.
Bye.